So my job was to, somebody would come in, typically mom, and say, hey, I need child support. And I'd ask for all their info, and then I'd ask for info about the guy. And one of the tough parts about the job is locate. We call it locate. So whatever she gives me, name, first and last name, phone number, my job is to then go back to my desk and try to find this guy, the exact match out of whoever, duplicate name, senior, junior, whatever. And when I find him, then it was my job to figure out how much is he making, where does he live, and filing a complaint to get him served with a legal action so that we can then establish paternity if it needed to be, or get money, basically. And wherever you see monogamy, you see the dowry. And the dowry is essentially a transfer of wealth that happens at marriage, but it happens from the bride's side. You're leaving this family, your family has this much money for you, and this is to help set up the new household. When you watch some of these panel shows or whatever, it's like women will say, oh, well, I should deserve a king or something like that. It's funny, when you look at actual kings, to sit in the queen's seat, you had to come with some serious cash. You asked me earlier about worst cases. They got divorced. This was after probably 5-6 years or whatever. In California, you have 2 years to challenge. And this guy just refused to pay. And he was like, why don't you want to pay anything? He's like, because the kids are not mine, and she's living with her ex-boyfriend who is the real father. So she got married to this guy, cheated on him in the marriage, had these kids, divorced him. We're requiring him to pay child support into this house, and she's now living with the kids with this previous ex-boyfriend who is the actual father, and this guy is paying money into their household. It's like a forced slavery.
What up, guys? Welcome to The Sit Down. Today I have Shaw from his channel, This is Shaw, and he actually worked in the child support system for how many years?
A little over 5 years.
And he was actually the guy chasing you down to get child support.
That was my job.
Do you get death threats now, or?
I mean, not now, but I used to.
Oh, yeah.
They used to say they were going to find me by the taco truck on my lunch break.
Oh, really?
I was like, how'd they know there was a taco truck out there? They're watching me. Yeah.
So you were the one actually calling them?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, in the first couple years that I worked there, I worked in a division called establishment. That's just how we broke it down. And establishment was all about making the new orders. So my job was to, somebody would come in, typically mom, and say, hey, I need child support. And I'd ask for all their info, and then I'd ask for info about the guy. And one of the tough parts about the job is locate. We call it locate. So whatever she gives me, name, first and last name, phone number, my job is to then go back to my desk and try to find this guy, the exact match out of whoever, duplicate name, senior, junior, whatever. And when I find him, then it was my job to figure out how much is he making, where does he live, and filing a complaint to get him served with a legal action so that we can then establish paternity if it needed to be, or get money, basically. So yeah, that was a tough part of the job. Sometimes people would come in and they would just have a phone number. They would have nothing else. I don't actually know his name.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
And was there any difference, when these people came in and you saw the crazy stories where the father of your kid, all you have is the phone number. Did you see big difference in did you see this across class, across race?
Yeah.
It was pretty much everything, or did you notice any differences?
I'll tell you this. Every now and then somebody who had a little bit of better income would get snagged. And typically it would be one person with a good income meets somebody that doesn't.
Yeah.
On either end. But for the most part, 65% of our cases were welfare cases.
Really?
Yeah, so that means that the reason the case opened up was because a single parent, typically mom, went to a welfare office and asked for money. So you got a home, you got a broken family. So the welfare office would say, hey, there's cash aid going for this kid. They would send us a request, and we'd automatically open up a case.
You got to find out if a girl's on welfare.
Yeah, well, we would instantly know. Oh, yeah.
No, I meant if you're dating.
Yeah, I mean, because a lot of times a guy would, when we'd call them, they'd be surprised, oh, but she said she doesn't want child support, or we're good. Why are you guys? And it was this really stupid thing where it's we couldn't explicitly tell them they're on welfare, but when they got the complaint, it says they're on welfare. I don't know why they did that. So A lot of our cases did fall into this category of where it had something to do with welfare. Now, sometimes the guy would have a decent job and she'd be on welfare, or, maybe once in a blue moon the other way around. And then the other, rest of the cases were non-welfare cases. So these can be people who were married, or they were never married, but they just, they had decent incomes and stuff. And they would split up, or they would go through a divorce, and it was just easier to come into our office and say, hey, can you get the child support order for us? We wouldn't, it's pretty much financed by the taxpayers, except for like a tiny amount. So there was a decent disparity, but a lot of the cases were welfare. But I would say you'd be surprised who you'd see in there. I'd see all kinds of people, doctors, lawyers.
That's the thing when I started researching this stuff was I was surprised at how much of the same problems I saw, because you always hear from TradCons to just find a special woman that's different. And they might say, I've had certain ones say it's different with this race. I've had some say that it's different with this class. Yeah. I've had some say it's different with this religion. And when I started interviewing victims of divorce rape, I didn't really see a difference. I saw women doing terrible things across all of that.
I could say at least for where I worked, the people from whatever background seem to match the percentage of the population where I live anyways.
Right.
So I never looked at it and thought, oh, there's, this many people, or I've never seen someone from this religion or that religion.
Yeah.
I'd see people that you wouldn't expect to be getting divorced, and they ended up across the table from me. So working there for 5 years, I wish I could tell you and tell myself, oh my God, all you got to do is find this specific thing and you're guaranteed she's never going to leave you or something like that. But no, I never found that demographic.
Yeah. What do you think about all of the TradCon arguments about just finding a good woman?
Well...
a religious...
Yeah, they'll say stuff like, well... just find somebody that shares your values. And to some extent, it's okay, I can kind of see what argument they're trying to make. But then at the same time, it's you'll see people even that, there's a lot of what I call cosplayers, maybe other people do too, or undercover feminists, I've heard that term. And there's a lot of people who can portray that well enough. But I think even of the people who are quote unquote that thing, can still have a likelihood of ending up getting divorced. And I've spoken to people as much who've done that. I don't think it's some surefire way of anything. I think you're really gambling it, especially with them too. I think the TradCon proposal is particularly dangerous because they have this heavy emphasis on, mom staying home, mom not working, mom not bringing any kind of financial contribution to this, and she submits and does all
sourdough.
That. Yeah, mom makes sourdough and, does all this, has the wooden spoon and all that. They're all about the cosplaying, but my personal opinion is I think we're just kind of in a new era beyond that, and anything you see is people trying to portray that, but they're not actually that thing. We're not organically creating these kind of traditional humans.
Right, because you can't even be in a traditional... I was actually on a show the other day explaining that you can't be in a traditional relationship because women always have the leverage.
Yeah,
always.
You can be... You can be someone who makes a lot of money. You can be a guy with a lot of money, and you can ostensibly find some woman who wants to stay at home that's younger, but it can still blow up in the era of no-fault divorce. You don't even have to be divorced. You can just walk into the child support agency and say, hey, we're not living in the same house. I want child support, and this is what I say the custody is, and we will file against them. When it comes to the top of my head, Tyrese Gibson is someone, what I think of as someone who makes a lot of money, and he found somebody and that didn't end up well. I know Steven Crowder is another example of a TradCon, and they all turned on that guy really fast. Yeah, I think it's largely an imbalanced proposal, and what they'll do, I just heard Matt Walsh say this, and he'll say, grandfathers, and for centuries and centuries, men provided and women did this, and this is what men biologically want to do. But they give this very reductionist view of history, and it misses a lot of important things. One of the rabbit holes I've been going down on my channel is the dowry and the history of the dowry. And wherever you see monogamy, you see the dowry. And the dowry is essentially a transfer of wealth that happens at marriage, but it happens from the bride's side, and it goes to that new couple. So it's pretty much an endowment on the woman, and it says, you're leaving this family, your family has this much money for you, and this is to help set up the new household. So in certain places like Greece, Cyprus, a typical dowry would be a fully furnished house, a paid-off house. That was the expectation for a middle-class family.
In Greece?
Yeah.
What time period? Like, when did the dowries start?
The dowry started around the time agriculture changed from light tools like the hoe and digging stick to heavier tools like the plow. As far as the time period of what I'm speaking of specifically, that's like right 1970s Cyprus I'm talking about right now. Now, there's a good paper. I had a discussion with Paul Elam, and we went over that paper, and they're talking about...
Really? So as recently as the 70s?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I figured it would be like 100 years ago plus.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff from around then. Different places sort of abandoned it at different times. I think England and US are probably earlier. They're one of the first places to get industrialized. You see kind of romantic love take over as, when modernization comes in, it tends to have a lot more job opportunity that's kind of different from what people were usually doing. So people can say, screw you, mom and dad, I'm going to live in an apartment with my girlfriend and we love each other. And, it just ended up that way. And then they're more interested in college and things like that. But
so in the US, was that like the 20s then? Because isn't that when it was like the 1880s to the 20s, I think? And cities started, I think
in the US, I don't remember exactly, but I think that would have been sometime in the 1800s.
Yeah.
The US was kind of known for abandoning these things a little bit earlier. And the reason is because, even in a lot of Europe, divorce didn't exist. It was annulments, basically, all throughout Christendom, basically. And then after you get your revolutions there, it changes. But the US was one of the first places right after the American Revolution to start saying, okay, we can do divorce now. And then they created their system of at-fault divorce. But, it's in some places it was still happening, but England and there it started to fall out of favor, especially as they got rid of, I think that's called not Coventry. Not Coventry. I can't remember the word for it, where the husband manages the finances and the woman can't take debt. So they start getting rid of that, I think late 1800s, and it falls out of favor. But the reason I think it's so important is because the dowry is the missing piece in how monogamy actually works. And it's what I call the check against hypergamy, basically. So they get rid of the dowry system and they essentially instill what is the love match. So it's we love each other. It doesn't matter what class you come from. There's all these rags to riches story. This guy can leave his farm and go get a job over here. And, now he makes all this money. I can take care of a family of 5. Screw you, father-in-law. And we can do whatever the hell we want to do. That's just a very short blip in history. And, as it goes on now, we're starting to see this situation again where houses are becoming harder to afford for the average person. Typically, both people do need to work if they're going to do this. Having a house and 2 kids and a wife is like $1 million venture at least over that, period. So I just hear the TradCon stuff, and what they will do is say men need to be protectors and providers, and they will be very hard on young men. And they'll put all this pressure on young men. They'll say men need to do better. Women just need to be good women, and men need to come in here and do all this stuff. But then when I look at it historically, I'm looking at all this stuff starting from, the turn of the 2 millennia ago, coming all the way down. Young men have never had the kind of pressure that they're putting on them, and I would say unjustly, because what would happen is they would get married, he would have some kind of income that her family would know what his trajectory was going to be. You can say, oh, he's from this family, it looks like he's a pretty sharp young guy. We want to marry our daughter within the same class. We're going to give her this dowry for her wedding. When they get married, they now have what's called a conjugal fund, and this helps set up the new household. It helps set up the trade shop or whatever for whatever this guy is going to be doing, and then they would go in that way. Nowadays, what we have is this really bad deal for monogamy. So you'll have these TradCons that'll say, you need to be monogamous, you need to do that. The groom needs to make this much money, and she should never have to think about it. They never mention anything about her family. contributing at all. And it's just impossible to do. And when you look traditionally, the way a family attracted a high status groom or a groom of equal class was they typically endowed their daughters with the dowry. So if you're a groom and you're looking at your options on the table, you're going to be okay with taking a monogamous match and focusing your time and efforts here because she's coming with something that's helped setting up a strong household. Could you imagine if I have a friend, he's an electrical engineer, okay? He's got a master's degree. And, and I only imagine if he would have, let's say he started his first job and he's making $100K a year, 90 to 100, and his trajectory is to make a lot more, whatever it is. And then there's some other family in the community. Maybe they know each other. Maybe they like each other. Maybe they don't know each other that well. But if her family was like, okay, she's 19, 20, whatever. You can go to college. We can spend this money on your college tuition or you want, or we can save this for your marriage. We have $200,000 set aside for you. She coming with $200,000 might be a good match for my buddy here because, okay, let's put this into the down payment of the house.
Right.
Let's put both of our names on it. You're going to stay at home and have the kids until they're old enough, and then if you want to get a job, do that. I'm going to be working. If this goes bust, we split the house down the middle. She has incentive to at least stay for some time. It might still suck a little bit down the line with all this custody stuff, but it would actually be a match that made sense.
She's got skin in the game.
She's got skin in the game, right. Exactly. Right now, they really don't have skin in the game. It's just, I'm a submissive wife, and I just want to stay home and do
right
this.
Now. You got to add in right now.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Right now. Yeah. And then 8 years goes by, and then he's sitting across the table from me, and he's just like, I don't understand.
But she said she would,
Yeah, she said I do, and all that stuff, and it's funny because with women like that, I feel like they're kind of more incentivized to make it seem like the guy was abusive because they have to keep this. I mean, you saw this with the Crowder situation. Right. Apparently, the footage was edited. That's what I've seen.
And what did he do? He yelled?
Yeah, he was in the back smoking a cigar so he wouldn't be smoking around his pregnant wife. And she came out there barefoot. She chose not to put shoes on. What? But anyways, I don't know. So then it's just like, okay, he's a bad guy. They get divorced. Now it's alimony. Now it's child support time. And it's just a stupid way of doing things, So I find it necessary to resurrect this. I'm not so crazy to say, we're going to bring back dowries. But what I'm tired of is them saying if a man tries to negotiate for himself when it comes to especially a monogamous marriage, that you're not masculine. Or something stupid like that. You're not being a man.
That was the other thing. I kept hearing from TradCons that women shouldn't work, right? But I kept thinking, well, maybe if you have, my grandma had 13 children. Mm-hmm. So that's a pretty strong case for not work. That's a lot of, but I'm like, we're having 1.5 in public school. What are you doing with your time?
Yeah, you're not even matching that.
I understand maybe the first couple of years, but once the kid's in school, you could be a teacher and have the same schedule as the child.
Yeah, I think
3 months off in the summer, it's a decent salary.
I think a lot of that also doesn't exactly match with history. So remember earlier I told you about how before the dowry, what you had was bride wealth, formerly called bride price. Okay. Most people know it as bride price. This is where the man pays the woman's family something, not to her family. Then as scholars studied it more, they changed the name from bride price to bride wealth because bride wealth describes it better. But back then, the reason that the man paid the bride wealth was because the woman worked. We're not just talking about kids. She was actually out there on the field. So back then, agriculture was less sophisticated. And that's why you see polygyny and bride wealth in places like sub-Saharan Africa. You saw that with ancient Israelites, even Old Testament and stuff like that. And you saw this in a lot of different civilizations. And then what they noticed is that as they changed from tools women can actually handle, like the digging stick or the hoe, and they moved to the plow. The plow is this heavy instrument that takes a lot of strength, and you got to have these cattle in the front pulling it, and you're trying to keep it in a straight line. So men ended up doing this. But back then, when women were using these other tools, they would be out on the fields working all day. And when you married her, her family lost that labor value. So you paid them a set price, and then they used that money to marry maybe another son in their family, and then it became a circulating fund. So bride welts are all uniform prices. It's not like this highest bidder thing. It actually is a set price.
So how many hours a day were the women work? I'm just trying, because I always hear that like women are very exhausted. They're working in human resources and they're just so tired. And so I've always wondered like what would be the comparison of what women did in different time periods to today. I just can't imagine it's easier or it's harder now.
Yeah.
But hey, I could be wrong.
That I'm not exactly sure, like in terms of what those specific women were doing. I hear it may be less depending. I think they probably work just as much, but I'd have to look at it.
Yeah.
What I will say is,
I just wonder what their day-to-day was like, you know?
Yeah, I mean, they're out there on the fields, they're doing all this stuff. But what happens is the plow comes in. And when the plow comes in, one person can plow a field that's way more than humans can do with the digging stick or with the hoe. So you end up with a lot more essentially wealth because you're able to till a lot more land, plant a lot more food. So when the plow comes in, women start to become housebound because they're not needed to work on the field anymore. So and the men started doing it all because it was a harder job to do. And it was just creating a lot more wealth that you started seeing income stratification. So polygynous societies, bride wealth paying societies tend to be very uniform. There isn't this very rich guy and this very poor guy. They're all about the same.
Oh.
Okay? Yeah, and then...
So there's more polygamy when there's less income disparity, is what you're saying?
Yeah, polygyny. Polygyny meaning that a man marries multiple.
Okay.
And the thing is like, you might have a guy with more than one wife, but he had to pay that same uniform price. So it circulates around. So it brings him back into a kind of a match with everybody else's wealth by doing that. When the plow comes on, you start to see income stratification, okay? Now when a woman's working on the field, she's bringing in real income to the house. We're not talking about labor at home. We're not talking about making sourdough bread. We're talking about actual agricultural income. So stuff that needs to be produced, basically. When the men start doing that and the women are more homebound, you end up with this huge income stratification. There's rich, there's middle class, there's poor. And then what you start to see is it goes from bride wealth. So now the man is not paying her family anymore. Polygyny starts to go away. Divorce becomes rare. And then it starts to become monogamous because now private property is a lot more important. Paternity of the child's going to be a lot more important too, because now you're thinking about inheritances a lot more, how this passes down. The whole other side of the equation of marriage is actually inheritance also. And when you talk about marriage, inheritance and how wealth threads down through generations is really a part of that discussion. So as you start getting these class differentiations, families want to either maintain class or they want to go up a class. That would be hypergamy. Technically, right? So to attract a high status mate, or at least a mate of equal status to you, and to be monogamous, they would attach a dowry to the daughter, which is part of her inheritance at the time of marriage. They would call it a pre-mortem inheritance, okay? So that happens, and then so what you end up seeing when you look historically, the people who marry each other tend to be from the same class. So they're making a financial contribution that's about the same. They're looking at what his income trajectory is going to be, and they're looking at what she's bringing in from technically what is her inheritance, So it's interesting because then when you look at TradCons today, if we bring this all the way back to today, it's like the man needs to make all the money. The woman's not responsible for bringing anything. And it's just your job to figure out as a young guy, and we want you to marry young, even though a dowry would help people marry young, because how else are you supposed to get this house? I mean, we're all waiting until we're 30, 31, 32 now anyways. So there are all these things that the dowry actually helped with. And back then there was no like welfare system or this kind of thing. You might have had some church charity or these kinds of things, but typically what you can expect in those societies, and I'm not talking about ancient time. It started to come in ancient times, but I'm talking even a few hundred years ago, is women without a dowry could not be expected to marry because that's how ingrained it was in the culture, so.
So what would happen to them? They would just be spinsters or what?
Yeah, they would probably just be at their house there, Some of them would end up joining a convent. There was still a fee to pay for that. It was just a lot less than the dowry. Or what would happen is they would end up working outside of the home to earn a dowry to then get married with. So you might find them being a servant in the house of a higher status family. And then part of that contract would be that family would then pay her dowry, so then she can then get married later. So you start to see, in bride wealth societies, people get married earlier and a lot younger over there. As dowry comes in, it pushes it back a little bit. Still relatively early for the way we do things nowadays. You start to see the sophistication and complexity in how society exists. So I've spent a lot of time looking at this just because it's really intrigued me. And now when I hear guys like Matt Walsh, Michael Knowles, whoever it's going to be, I think Lila Rose is another one, they'll sit here and they'll make a big deal about monogamy and about all this stuff, but what they're trying to trade for is something that is really untenable. I mean, she can just leave with no-fault divorce. I think a lot of these women that say they're submissive aren't actually submissive. I mean, we're all growing up in the same culture, it seems like.
Yeah.
And then, the family law is waiting there on the other end to just really make it tough. It's really hard. So a lot of guys at this point are basically abstaining from it, or they're saying, all right, the long-term deal sucks here. What do I get out of this? I may as well just engage in short-term stuff. Or, the woman gets disappointed because the guy's playing her, and then she's like, oh, I thought he wanted to get married. He didn't want to get married. There's all this upset stuff going on because we live in this very weird gray zone where people want to have 1 foot in and 1 foot out.
Yeah, because, there's a difference between a guy looking for like a hookup or a girlfriend and he being on like the marriage market.
Yeah.
So what incentive are they really giving men? They're not the dowry at least would lower the risk.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too. It's funny because when you watch some of these panel shows or whatever, it's like women will say, oh, well, I'm a queen and this and that, or I should deserve a king or something like that. It's funny when you look at actual kings, to sit in the queen's seat, you had to come with some serious cash. Like you weren't just going there for no reason. And if he's going to marry someone that brings nothing just because she's so beautiful, everybody would look at him like he's the stupidest person on the planet. King Henry VIII is one that's kind of a famous, royal dowry story. The queen that he was married to, he's the one that ended up, breaking away from the Catholic Church. And his first wife that he was married to for like 20 years, she brought what was pretty much the annual income of all of England at the time, which is something that they needed. They have all the same problems up there.
Wow.
Yes. So if you're a woman and you say, you want to be the queen and you're bringing nothing, you have no contribution, it really is, the height of delusion. They need to look in the mirror and say, and understand what class they're actually in.
It's kind of crazy that we're in a time where, like, basically a peasant woman can get a kid off of a king.
Unfettered hypergamy is what that is. The dowry used to be a check against that, because let's say these two found each other, okay, and somebody brings up marriage. Instantly, it would be a rejection, because when they say, okay, let's talk about marriage, the marriage discussion is a very different discussion from dating or whatever. And I want men to remember this. I really do. I want men to remember how it was negotiated in the past. So as we go into the future, they can have something to say back to them that they can't be accused of not being masculine. So many masculine men in history did this, but they would say, okay, what's your dowry? What does your father do? What's your family background? And if the answer is nothing, I don't have a dowry to match this person up here, they'd be like, yeah, this marriage isn't going to work. You might want to look at someone closely to your class. So it's a check against that. So you can't just hide that. Nowadays, what you'll get is an actor, or you'll get an NFL player, and they'll marry somebody with nothing, and then they get dragged through the family law courts afterwards, and they're wondering what happened. So that's what we see nowadays, and a lot of this was encouraged from what I would say was very good economic times, probably through the wealth brought in from colonialism, brought in through industrialization, brought in through modernization. Especially post-World War II, it was a different kind of economy. You also saw this in Cyprus and places like that. So, Cyprus, the dowry was typically a house for the middle class. As it started to get modernized, and that was after England. England was like the first place, you can say. They start sending their kids over to England and places like that to get educated. They start to get urbanized. You start to get these mega cities. You start to get cheap apartments for rent. They're living away from their families. There's different jobs you can take now because of modernization. People who might have been at a lesser class can go jump up a class easier. So they're more focused on that. And I think what you ended up with was a kind of market bust, because a lot of guys here are saying, okay, well, I'm now worth more because I went to college and I have this job, where typically they would have married her. This family's probably having trouble getting her married. And you end up with this it's like a perfect storm. And then feminism, all these things, changes in laws.
So it's a market bust because now the kings are like having kids with basically like peasant women in a way, and vice versa.
It's harder to chart someone's income trajectory than it was back then. So that romantic love, the love match takes over. You start to see that in literature. You think about it, like the printing press, I think, came in the mid-1400s. Literacy rate was really low. Then they start making polyglot Bibles, and then they start making these tales of chivalry and these knights who would do these amazing things for women. That starts to get very popular. Literacy rate goes up, more people start to read, modernization. So there's a cultural change. And then, people start looking for their love story a lot more. But even as that goes, still for a long time, we were talking about Germany earlier, even into the 1850s, if you look at their records there, people who are getting married are still bringing, some kind of dowry or equal contribution. Then this basically falls out of favor. I think we're hitting a point now where the economy and the culture and life, they'll say, oh, chivalry's dead, whether you believe that or not. Women, Coach Greg Adams, we'll talk about the monetized dating marketplace.
Right.
Millennials are having trouble buying houses. You know what I mean? And what I'm seeing is a kind of similarity to the way economy used to be back then. Millennials might have a better time starting families and getting houses if the parents are more involved in terms of a wealth threading through the generations like they used to do for thousands of years. So we're in this very interesting time. And I think we're kind of pushing on something new in the culture where I would like to see men at least remember this, so they don't have to feel like they're not a man if they ask for what's owed to them if they're going to be the provider. So my real first, axe to grind is what TradCon, so to speak, because they're the ones who are selling this stay-at-home monogamy with the man as this provider, the 100% provider. So that's where I've been at for a while now.
So what would happen if the daughter says, but Dad, I love him, or the son says, she's so hot.
Yeah.
What would happen if they told the parents no?
Well,
in those time periods.
Yeah, if you really went against your parents like that, instead of receiving your endowment.
Sorry, was this arranged? It was arranged, right?
Yeah, it's arranged. I think when it comes to arranged marriage, people have this sort of understanding that it's like, oh, it all happens from when they're 5 and they'll never have a say in it. What you have is like matchmakers and stuff like that. And you have, even if you look at more recent history, if you look at Europe and stuff like that, they would call it the mean person, so to speak. So this mean person will probably understand in the community who's single, what dowries they're bringing, what the men are going to be making. And then in their minds, they're going to be like, okay, these might be good pairings. They might suggest different pairings. And then however you guys do that negotiation, then it would happen. So then you can see in marriage contracts back then, how they do these kinds of things. If a daughter, to answer your question, was like, no, I don't, screw this, I love this person, Romeo and Juliet style or whatever. What would probably happen, and I know there's all stuff with the church and how that would probably be something different, but they would probably not receive their dowry, so to speak. So it would say you run off or you elope, so to speak, you're written out of your portion, your marriage portion, or if you're a son and you do the same thing, whatever your inheritance is going to be is going to go away. And that's a decision that you make. And nowadays in our culture, it's kind of the same thing. Parents aren't really expected to contribute anything in that regard. The future father-in-law, so to speak, men don't look at him and say, okay, what's the contribution from him? So this there's been this change where the way wealth is threaded isn't really the same. And I mean, a lot of people are in a bad situation anyways. They can barely figure out retirement. They don't have something to give. Or the parents are already divorced. So the juice egg, that's one thing I knew from working at child support is like you'd have, especially when it was a family that they were married, when the divorce happens, whatever nest egg they had for those kids just gets juiced so fast.
Right.
Whether it's to the attorneys, or if it's just imagine being in one house, now you have 2 houses with 2 mortgages and 2 electric bills and 2 this, 2 that. So there's kind of not much left for the kids when it's their very important time of their lives to figure out what am I going to do.
Well, it's interesting too because with so many single mothers coming up, like the chance of this dowry happening is like negative 1,000.
No.
And even it's interesting too because when I was thinking about the class difference for Elon Musk and Ashley Sinclair in history, that never would have happened ever.
Yeah, no. I mean, and if it did happen, at least in the more recent history, that would be an illegitimate child. What would happen to them? So back then it was really different. Like nowadays, we do this thing where we take a child who's illegitimate and we make them legitimate, which means they have rights of inheritance and all this stuff in probate court. Back then, an illegitimate child, you're not going to legally inherit.
No way.
Yeah, so you have this illegitimate child. It doesn't count, and the church was strict on this too. There was no genetic tests back then either, but let me tell you something. Adoption wasn't even legal until relatively recently.
No way.
The church outlawed adoption. And from ancient Rome, from whenever Christianity became the sort of state religion, all the way up and through like 1850 or so, adoption was illegal. So they were very specific about, what marriages can happen.
So what would happen to the kids whose parents died?
Well, they'd probably end up in some kind of orphanage or,
okay.
But so it's interesting when you look at it, because what happens is back then, like let's say you married someone and she was barren or she couldn't have kids. You couldn't really know that before. They would maybe marry a concubine who's not a wife, but she can provide a child and he or she could be made legitimate. The church outlawed concubinage when they became monogamous.
So it almost helped the infertile woman because, like in a way, because she still gets to stay married instead of getting divorced.
If you look up what organization on the planet owns the most property, guess what do you think it is?
I'm thinking Bill Gates.
It's the Catholic Church.
Oh no! I should have been able to guess.
The Catholic Church owns the most property. Because what would happen is you'd end up with people who didn't have heirs to pass it on to, and they would gift it to the church. So when they outlawed adoption, so you couldn't adopt somebody to pass it on, you couldn't have a concubine, about 20% of people wouldn't have kids in Europe, and another 20% would only have daughters. So that particular daughter, if she didn't get married, she would have a really nice dowry because she's inheriting everything. It's not just her portion. But anyway, so it's an interesting history. So you can kind of see how that forms Europe and what's different about it. But the part to where we get to today is nowadays you'll see all kinds of strange things. You'll have a kid out of wedlock, and then as soon as the child support agency makes that kid a legal child, now this kid has claims to certain things. That's why sometimes when
historically that would never happen. Because it would just be the parents.
Yeah. Well, this kid would be a bastard. It'd probably be pretty hard to prove that, first of all. I mean, genetic tests came in the 90s. Relatively, that's where you got Maury Povich, you got the show. Prior to that, you had blood tests. And paternity cases were like some of the hardest cases for our attorneys at the child support agency. Nowadays, they're easy because DNA tests make it so easy. But back then, you'd have to have these whole paternity trials, and you'd have to bring in witnesses, and I saw them, and they were behind the barn, or whatever happened. You know what I mean? So then you can place them there. So then nowadays, I look at genetic tests as like a nuclear bomb in this space, basically, because once that happened, it meant it doesn't matter what the relationship with the child is. This guy's the father. We can immediately get money from him. And this is why child support and custody are separate also, by the way.
I'm curious, do you know anything about like when that did come out, if they found it, like has this cheating been going on for longer than we thought?
Yeah.
Because I saw someone on Twitter like replied to one of my tweets, and they said that they looked at genealogical records and found that there was a lot more cheating from like neighbors and other people in town than we know in history. Now this is a random person on Twitter, so I don't know, but I was just curious. You seem to have read a lot about this topic.
Yeah, I don't know if you can point to any specific numbers on there. I think there was definitely a lot of that because once again, you couldn't prove it. So, and typically if communities were more homogenized and, your neighbor didn't look that different from you, it might be harder to tell. So it probably did happen. I mean, if you go off numbers now, I think they say out of genetic tests that they actually do, which means that there was a suspicion of cheating already. About 30% of them or something end up not being it. But, there were some indications where I think people might have been suspicious.
If there was DNA tests, oh my God.
It would have been different.
No, I meant now if there's mandatory DNA tests at birth.
They should do that.
But they can't.
I'll tell you this.
They can't because, like let's say 20% of the population is raising kids that aren't kids.
And they find out.
And what is that going to do to society?
Yeah.
I don't think the government will ever let it happen.
I'll tell you this, there's less incentive for the government to do it because from the government's point of view, they want to see children born that have legal parents that are responsible for them. If the government probably does not want to pay to find out that we don't know who the dad is and then, have more kids on welfare or foster care. I will say there has been suspicions in history. I think it's called Lord Mansfield's rule. This was in late 1700s. I can't remember exactly. But it was in England and they made it to where you couldn't challenge paternity of the kid all the way back then. So it kind of leads me to believe that there must have been people who were like, that's not my kid. And they were trying to get this figured out until they were like, no, stop bringing this up, basically. So there's always suspicion. It's possible.
As most of you know, I have been fighting on the front lines of the simp epidemic for years, but I need to tell you about a quiet weapon being ratcheted up against men that is rarely talked about. It's not just the relentless anti-masculinity propaganda and OnlyFans hoes causing the societal issues that we discuss on this show. Did you know that the average city's tap water contains trace pharmaceuticals and endocrine disruptors? This often includes estrogen from birth control. The average adult consumes a credit card worth of plastic every single week. That's 5 grams of plastic a week on average. So it's no wonder that the average male's testosterone is half of what the average was 50 years ago. Testosterone levels decline 1% a year, and without a course correction, we are headed towards extinction. No matter how based you are, you need to be naturally boosting your testosterone. My friends at Chalk, CHOQ.com, are on a mission to save mankind from extinction by boosting your vitality. Chalk's Male Vitality Stack contains premium and potent herbs clinically studied to naturally boost your testosterone levels, sperm count, and overall vitality. Just one of the many ingredients in the Male Vitality Stack was studied in double-blind human clinical trials to boost total testosterone 20% in 90 days. When you boost your testosterone, you'll have more mental clarity, you're more capable of making decisions and taking risks. Having high testosterone will also affect your pheromones, so women will find you more attractive subconsciously. Get the Chalk Male Vitality Stack right now on Chalk.com. That's CHOQ.com. Use my name Pearl as your coupon code and you'll get 25% off site-wide on Chalk.com. That's CHOQ.com. My name Pearl is the discount code. Yeah, because I just wonder, do you think any laws will change in the future? I find it, I'm going to give you my thoughts so you can tell me if you agree or disagree. But I find it very improbable because there's just so much money in this machine. So with all the lawyers that are involved, all the policymakers, all of the people benefit, Social Security, I don't see any incentive for it to change. Do you have more hope than me?
I'm definitely guilty of being you know how you got the just lift bros? I was a just change the laws bro kind of guy.
Yeah.
But, I've spent a lot of time talking with a lot of folks in this space, especially with folks like Paul Elam, Peter Wright.
Yeah.
And they've kind of watched these sort of men's rights initiatives happen over a long period of time, just in their lives, but also historically. They've done the research and they've kind of seen that if the culture is not caught up with it, it tends to not happen. So I don't see any big push for laws to change, unfortunately. I think with more men avoiding marriage, The only time they start to ask questions is when it seems like they're losing out. Like, oh, the birth rate's down, or this is this, or men's checking out.
There's an incentive then.
Yeah, and it's like, what can we do? And they will do everything they can to avoid giving men stuff. I hate to say it, but what they'll do is like, oh, well, how can we make IVF easier for women?
Yeah.
Or something like that. Or let's give women a tax break or something, and the men get
now
nothing.
They're paying us to have kids.
Yeah, I think I saw that recently. So,
like, you think $5,000 is going to help? No.
Yeah, and it's it's kind of a strange thing because we know kids have a tougher time, or at least a worse prognosis, if the father's not in their life, and there's a lot of people selling marriage, and if they want to do that, they need to make marriage a deal that at least works for both parties, at least during at-fault divorce. Okay, there were no dowries back then, but at least in at-fault, you had some protection. If you cheated on her as the guy, you'd get screwed over, and rightfully so. You caused the injury in this. You were at fault. If she cheated on you, you'd be the injured party, and the way that the assets of the marriage get divvied up would be different. So we don't even have that. Now we have no fault. And I know there's an argument. We can't even go back to at fault. That's unrealistic. There'd be so many false abuse cases. It's just would be a waste of money anyways, probably. But, that was at least still, in my opinion, a little bit better. Now we're at no fault. This is why I like to study things like the dowry and things, is because we're in this environment that's so hostile legally. And it's like, if I was going to take the monogamy deal, it would at least make sense. And this is what our ancestors did. Another thing is like, I worked at child support. So the whole job of a child support officer is to look at a calculator. Aside from the locate and the cheek swabs for the genetic tests and whatever, the calculator is just this thing on my screen that you have to know. And on this side, you put in his income. On that side, you put in her income. And then this is the custody. And then there's, various other things, whatever your mortgage interest or something. But for the most part, that's the core of it. And so for 5 years, I look at this calculator, and if two people make the same income and it's 50% custody, that's zero. Nobody owes each other anything. If you're a guy and she makes more money, she might have to end up paying you, depending on what custody is, or especially for alimony, that's going to be different. So I read thousands of divorce orders and child support orders, and I just looked at the calculator. I looked at what people were doing. I saw whose divorces seemed to be the worst, who seemed to be at least manageable. Like, if I had to get divorced, who would I be? Mm-hmm. And the people that seem to be married to people who make around the same income seem to have the most, easy, amicable divorces. If you're not going to have that, and she's not going to make money, and you're going to make a lot of money, at least not be married to her, because there's a difference.
I don't think I had a single. Now that I'm thinking about it, I don't think I had a divorce story that was super bad from two people making the same.
Yeah.
I'm not saying, I'm sure they're out. We've seen.
There's the emotional nightmare part.
Yeah. They'll cheat.
They'll
cheat at work.
That part sucks, but at least, you'll have, here's the thing. If you're going to end up getting divorced, you guys make around the same. And I've always read this in orders. What will happen is both parties usually agree to terminate spousal support. So the court will write, court terminates jurisdiction to award spousal support. And then that's it. They might set child support to zero, and they might just figure out custody on their own. Now, later on, that could be an issue, and she might say, oh, I want to keep custody from him, and they'd have to go through that. But at least you have money to fight for custody. At least you're not paying. Imagine paying alimony, paying child support. We're fast. Even if your divorce isn't complete yet, you'll be paying child support. You're paying all this, and then somewhere along the line, you got to figure out how to fight for custody. And, there's a lot of custody horror stories out there to where a guy spends over $100,000 just to get some small percentage of custody. So it's all, kind of a Pyrrhic victory there. So yeah, on the job, I'm looking at this and I'm just like, man, I'm hearing stuff in the space, and on the one hand, TradCons are saying this. I'm like, oh no, that's bad. You even get red pill guys will say, oh no, we want this, we want that. The guy should make all the money and do that. Okay, fine, if that's what you want. But if you sign a marriage contract, get the marriage license, not even a real contract anymore. Now it's just the family codes. Reading marriage contracts from the past are very interesting. But that's another thing. If you take that deal, it's just how can you even complain later when you get screwed over?
Yeah, so if you do take the deal, like what's worse if you have a stay-at-home? Like
stay-at-home or the worst?
Tell me if you're at the same income, what you're gonna pay. Like, or versus if you have a like how much more money am I? Let's say I make $100K a year.
Yeah.
How much more money am I spending if I marry a woman that also makes $100K or she makes zero?
If she also makes $100K, I think that would be the ideal situation because it's a similar contribution. You guys have probably put the same into the house, but as far as alimony, what will likely happen is that the court you guys will just both agree that there's no alimony and for the court to just waive jurisdiction. That's what I saw in most of the judgments. So on most of the divorce and dissolution judgments I read, when the incomes are like that, more than likely they had written that in there. It was like standard language.
The same income.
About the same or about this, around or, it's just depending. Sometimes even if she was higher, men were just more or less likely to take alimony, even if they could have got it.
Yeah.
But typically if it's about the same, they'd say, okay, you keep your retirement, I keep my retirement, no alimony. And there might be some small amount of child support if he's like, okay, you know what? I actually can't keep them this amount of time. Or she's like, I can't, I'll pay a little bit of that. And then the house would either get split or somebody would buy each other out. And they were typically the most amiable divorces. I've seen a lot of nightmare ones where it's just sitting at my desk, I just cannot be the guy that gets the worst end of this. It does not matter. It doesn't matter who cheated on who, whatever it is. You asked me earlier about like worst cases. I didn't work this one specifically, but my coworker in the cubicle next to me, the case was so bad, I heard him on the phone, he had to put it down and stand up and come talk to me because he needed to talk to somebody.
Yeah.
And this was somebody who was, he was married to the woman, and I can't remember if it was 2 or 3 kids. But they got divorced, and, this was after probably 5-6 years or whatever. In California, you have 2 years to challenge. So he owed child support. The reason it came to my coworker's desk was he worked on a special arrears unit for people who owed a lot of money. And this guy just refused to pay, okay? And so when he called him up, and he was like, why don't you want to pay anything? He's like, because the kids are not mine, and she's living with her ex-boyfriend who is the real father. So she got married to this guy, cheated on him in the marriage, had these kids, divorced him. We're requiring him to pay child support into this house, and she's now living with the kids with this previous ex-boyfriend who is the actual father, and this guy is paying money into their household. It's like a forced slavery. He put the phone down. He came to me and he was like, if it was me, I'm like, yeah. He's like, I don't want to say it if it was me. I was like, yeah, I get it. Don't worry. So, yeah, that's just there are some real nightmare situations like that, but.
So what's the difference in child support or alimony versus someone that had, let's say the custody's 50-50, one was a housewife, one made the same?
Well, let's say, okay, if it's a housewife too, typically, she'll probably get most of the custody. But let's say a guy's making, it's $8,000 a month, about as a gross income. Let's say it's worst case scenario, whatever. She says you were violent, you get kicked out of the house, you got no custody, you're fighting this, the divorce hasn't even gone through, child support's already involved because she went straight to the child support agency. You would be paying about 25% of your net income. So the calculator would figure in the taxes for the $8,000. It would probably be about $5,300 or so is going to be net. And then you'd probably be paying about $1,500 or so, just off rip. If it's around the same income and custody's the same, it would be 0. And even if it's 50-50, I don't know what it would be off the top of my head, but it would be less than that amount. So I recommend people to play around with their state child support guideline calculator. In some states, California is pretty bad. People know that there's interest on arrears. New York is pretty tough. Florida, you remember, I don't know if it's okay to bring up, but there was a Fresh and Fit, and there was that possible baby story. And they're in Florida, and she went back to New York, and she was saying very publicly that, he's not helping me, and he kicked me out. Basically, because of his actions, she had to go back to New York. When I saw that, that's a very specific thing legally, because, sorry if this is off topic, but it's just something important to know. There are very specific laws where if you have one, let's say you're in a state where child support might be less, and then she's here living with you, and then you guys have a kid, and then she leaves and goes back to live with her parents. She can argue that because of his directives, I had to go back to California. So it means that California has jurisdiction to make the order, so it's a higher order. So that's what you saw with New York versus Florida. That's what she was trying to do. I always thought she'd talk to an attorney or something like that. But so there's all these little stupid rules and games, but a lot of it can be negated by, if you're gonna have a kid with somebody, have one with somebody who at least has some kind of job or career. I know a lot of people don't like that. TradCons don't like that. Even red pillars don't like that because they, the women aren't supposed to do that or whatever. I'm just looking at it from what I saw in the papers.
25% though, that was for the same income or the housewife?
That was for the housewife.
Okay, so
it would be less. It would be less for someone who's working.
Okay, so someone that was working, it might be. Could I get a range? I know it depends.
I say it'd be anywhere from 0. It depends on custody. Okay. If you have 0% custody, you'd still pay about that 25%.
Okay, so if you got nothing, it would be the same.
Yes.
But you're more likely to get nothing if she's a housewife.
Yeah, because she's just been there.
Yeah.
A lot of it goes off the relationship with the child. And it's weird because it's like you come home every night and see the kid, but they're going to be like, okay, she's been at home with the kids. Mm-hmm. So they're going to be more likely to give it to her. She doesn't have a job now. Mm-hmm. So you're going to be paying alimony. You're going to be paying the bills on the house. You might be ordered to do that. While they're trying to figure out what happens to this. You're going to be paying an additional child support, and they may or may not tell her to try to find a job, probably not. The only time they might do that is if she had a prior history of working. I saw somebody with like a master's degree, and this lady was crying in court, but eventually they're just like, you have a master's degree, how come you're not working or making any money, So they imputed some income onto her, which was pretty rare. So that will depend on custody. But for the most part, most of those orders I've seen were a lot easier to deal with. That's just my experience.
I'm just curious, on average, the percent difference, if they're close to the same.
If it's close to the same, it all depends on, because now custody is the deciding factor.
What if they get semi-fair?
If it's like 50-50?
50-50 or close.
It
doesn't have to be 51%, so someone makes in Texas at least. I talked to
on the California guideline, they will put 51% and 49%, even if it's actually 50-50.
Okay.
Sometimes I have seen them do that. But just because it's 50, if it's 50-50 and they're each making $8,000, let's say, it's 0 child support. If she's a housewife and he's making $8,000, I don't know the exact percentage, but it's going to be a little bit less than the 24%. It's still going to be over half that, though. So it'll probably be around like 15 to 20%.
Okay.
Just depending.
But over time, that's going to add up.
Yeah, it's still going to. It's still a lot. I saw this case, and this guy made a big mistake. It was actually a police officer. They make pretty good money, depending on where they are, 10 to 15 a month. I think he was around 8 to 10, somewhere there, I think. And he went to a different state and ended up knocking somebody up on a one-night stand. And so he's at home with his wife and kids, and they have a mortgage, and his wife stay at home, so he's paying everything.
So who did he knock up? It wasn't the wife, it was like a side chick.
Yeah. It was in a I can't remember where it was, but he went somewhere, and basically it happened that California had to make the order. So, looking at the math on this case, if this guy makes $8,000 to $10,000 or whatever, they have a mortgage that's like, $2,500 a month. So take taxes away, take the mortgage away, take this away. And then all of a sudden, so he's not paying any child support to anybody, which means this is the first child support order, which means it's going to be like that max amount of 20. He's got 0% custody. He didn't even know this kid existed until we opened the case. So they're taking like it's going to be a significant amount where he might not even be able to pay his bills for his family. So, that's the game that they're playing. You'd see stuff like that. And I don't know. So as a guy that's worked there before, I can't get it out of my mind to not be doing, like if I go to a wedding and I might just, okay, so what do they do? That's interesting. And then in my brain, I'm doing all this math, and I'm God bless them. I hope the marriage lasts forever. But, I was thinking, okay, what happens if, But in the dowry system, this is stuff they were thinking about. This is a front-end deal for a long-term monogamous marriage. Nowadays, I think and this is where I think red pill stuff is good because it really helps out with intersexual dynamics, or if you look at it from the MGTOW side and all this kind of stuff. That's interesting. I think red pill at its best helps men maximize short-term options. And you can have a casual relationship with somebody for 15 years. I would still consider that a short-term, low-leverage thing. But when it comes into this long-term, let's have kids and now leverage ourselves and invest ourselves into it, nobody really has a good solution for that. Red pill, they always used to say, too, even with the red pillars on Reddit, there used to be married TRP, and they said guys who were married had the hardest version of red pill.
Yeah.
They had it the toughest, basically. And you can apply some of that stuff, and it may work, but for a lot of people, it's not going to work. And for a lot of people, you're not going to be this extremely rich person that can bounce back or whatever. You're going to be normal.
Have more of a risk if you do the trad thing and have a bunch of kids, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you can end up with, one kid will be about 25%. That's what we're talking about. 2 kids will be about 40%. And then,
holy shit.
Yeah.
40%
of the net income. And then 3
all the guys are going to be I'm 1 kid.
Yeah, then it'll hit 55, and then it'll eventually hit some maximum. But at that point, there was a guy.
Gosh, it goes up to 55%. That is so insane.
It reaches some maximum.
That's pre-tax or?
Well, that's net.
What?
The amount of child support, that percentage applies to their net earnings. So it's the calculator, at least the California one it does the taxes. So you'll put in your dependents and stuff like that. There was a case, and I swear to God, we used to show this I became a trainer for a little bit too. But even when I got hired on, the lady who was training me, she was really funny. She would always tell me, she's just if you're ever going to get married, ask for their credit report. You better ask for their credit report.
Okay.
Anyways, that's just funny. That's good advice though.
Yeah.
But she had this specific case, and this guy, I swear to God, he had 15, he had at least 14 or 15 cases, and some of them with multiple kids on it. This guy was legendary amongst the office. And the thing was I think he worked some normal job. So child support had no choice but to just try to get a percentage based off however this calculator could, because they could only get so much out of this one turnip.
Okay.
And so some of the kids would have a $12 order. Some would be getting $3 a month. Some of them had a prior one.
No way.
Yeah, but this guy, he was going to be a lifer. I mean, because some of them, he owed hundreds of thousands. There was no way he was ever going to be able to pay this off. And you can't bankrupt the debt. It was just, but he would pay his payments. We'd have to work and say, okay, well, this is your paycheck. You got to at least pay us this much. And somehow he was doing that. So.
Did you ever meet him?
I never met him, but I'll tell you something funny.
So is he really attractive, or what was the?
That's so funny you said it. You know why that's funny? Because when I first got hired, the woman whose case it was, who originally, and then when I became a trainer, I'd show the same case, but she told us about how, this is before COVID and Zoom, right? So back then, if one kid would be added, a new kid was born, they'd have to modify all the other orders. So they'd have to bring all the moms into court on one day. And I swear to God, the women that worked at the child support office all had to go across the street because they had to see what this guy looked like. Mm-hmm. I never saw him, but according to them, he was pretty average or normal. But maybe they were just saying that because they didn't like him or something. But
what did he do? Maybe it was the job he was in had a lot of women. I'm thinking
it was just
DJ, club promoter.
No, it was relatively nondescript.
Bartender, no.
No, I mean, a lot of people just work for the government where I'm at. So it was something like that, yeah. But yeah, it was a normal job, a normal income.
A lot of the government employees are women, so maybe... Right?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure they're the majority.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean,
slaying girls in the office.
Well, and I'll tell you, there's a lot of scumbag women out there, but there's also scumbag men too sometimes I once had a woman come in the office, and she had it was a 6-month-old kid. The baby was in the little, carry thing. And I'm in there, and, I'm opening the case, give me your application. Okay, what do you do? I'm getting her income. Okay, what's the kid's name? Okay, how old's the kid, birth date, all that stuff. And then when I see the dad's name, I saw so I can see from my end, he already existed in the system with the whole other child support case. So I do the calculation, and she's getting like, I swear it's like $124 a month because he's already paying on this other case, and that's how it came out. So I show her, I'm like, okay, well, I got the complaint filed. We'll go ahead and get this served to him. This is what we're asking for. And she's like, $124? She's like, I don't understand. Like, he works. Why would it be so low? And like, I didn't realize this at the time, and I kind of blurted it out, and I felt bad. But I was like, oh, well, it's because he's paying support for his other kids. See, if you look at the calculation, you can see how much he's paying for the kid. And she was like, he has other kids? And I swear to God, in that moment, like I saw like her realizing how badly she got screwed over from. I felt bad for her. Like I really felt bad. Like, oh my God, like you got screwed.
This is one of the moms, or this is a different one?
This is one of the moms.
Oh, from
they weren't
the
married.
Guy that,
oh no, this is a different guy. Completely different case.
Okay.
Yeah, no worries. So I saw that end of it. So I'm like, guys can. I used to call this going nuclear. This is different, but guys can really screw over. Like some guys, once they got caught in the system, they would say F this and have as many kids with as many different women as possible. And it would just have to divide up the order.
Right.
And on the other end, women can say, screw this, I'm going to have as many different kids with as many different guys as possible. Right. And if they don't owe other child support, I'll get the max order from each of them.
Oh, so they kind of become...
Yeah. So if you have one kid with somebody, let's say it's the 25% of the income. Then if you have two kids, it's 40%. That's with the same guy. If you have two different guys, now you have 25% of each of their incomes.
What if is there a difference between if you have different moms or the same mom? Like, do you pay more if it's different? Or?
No, it's all the same guideline calculation.
Okay.
What affects it, though, is there's a part on the calculator that asks for other support paid or other kids that you have. And when you put that in, it'll make an adjustment to the rest of them. And sometimes they'll have to, it gets really technical, but sometimes you'd have to have, like as a caseworker, we used to call it toggling. And you'd have to have 3 cases up, and I'd have to put in, okay, this child support amount, then I'd have to put that in the other one, and I'd have to keep doing it until it balances out. It's like an interesting thing, so. So that's all kinds of wacky stuff I'd see. You'd see all kinds of crazy things. I saw a lady, this lady had like 15 kids, and she was running some kind of scam. I don't know what it was, but I think it had something to do with immigration back then. Because the guy, I don't know, like the guy, it was like an undocumented person, and she was there, and she was having kids with people, and I don't know, I couldn't put my finger on it, but it was just super strange, and I kept trying to tell this guy, hey, if you need a genetic test, you might want to ask for that, and he's just like, she's like bossing him around and trying to say, no, just sign. I'm like, hey, you got to be quiet. I need to tell him this. He needs to make a decision. This isn't,
Mm-hmm.
So I would see strange things. I would see social security numbers. Like sometimes we would see 2 incomes coming in for one social security number, and usually it was because an undocumented person was using this person's social security number to work under, so it would show this person's working 2 full-time jobs, and we'd be like, oh, that's weird. Like, that's not the case. So there's all kinds of wacky things with child support. I mean, there'd be welfare fraud. International cases were another thing. It's a system that you think is simple, but it's incredibly complex and technical. Like, it takes like a year to really understand how it works.
And so I want to know what this guy looked like, the 16. I want to know, like, was he, I can't believe a normal guy got 16 girls pregnant. That's insane.
Yeah. Oh, God. I couldn't say. I mean, there's some things I've seen in there because we have to put different attributes about them, but,
yeah.
I didn't see him in person. Let's just say that.
Yeah. But so your whole point, though, is that conservatives are missing that the dowry is the really...
Yeah.
I mean, because we can't... my personal opinion is if the laws change, I don't know if it'll be in my lifetime at a point when it matters.
Yeah.
Like it might be in 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
But I hope it's sooner, but as CGA says, hope isn't a strategy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So
high value man equals high value target. That's another CGA-ism.
Yeah.
And that's what I used to see at child support, by the way.
Really?
Yeah, higher value man, bigger fish to fry if you're going to take the TradCon deal.
Yeah.
But yeah, going to what you're saying about...
And the only equalizer in a way, and it's not even really an equalizer, it just lowers the risk a little bit, is the women earning more or the women bringing a dowry. Like instead of going to college, they bring the money. Yeah,
exactly. And I think at the very least, men need to use that understanding as a as a tool for negotiation and not feel like their masculinity is at stake. Just because you ask for an equal contribution doesn't mean you're suddenly wearing a skirt or something like that. That's literally how they did it historically. And I would encourage anybody to research the dowry and how it really worked. There's a lot of people with a lot of misconceptions about it. And they don't understand it. Even with the data that we have, it's formally called marriage transactions. That's the heading. That's where bride wealth and dowry are filed under. You also have bride service. I think Leah and Rachel in the Old Testament, when they were married, I can't remember if it was Jacob or not, but he did 7 years of bride service for them, laboring for the father. So that's a different kind of thing. Then there's bride wealth and there's dowry. In monogamous societies, dowry is what it is. And what you see is that in societies practicing that, it actually negates hypergamy. And as the people up here start to pair off with monogamy, it creates positive assortative matching going down. So if you have someone who's high status, the only thing you can possibly give him to actually be monogamous is some kind of deal on the other side that's so good that he takes it. That's why King Henry VIII, when his brother Arthur died, married his brother's widow because she had such a big dowry.
No way.
Yes, that they were like, you need to take this, and you're stupid if you don't do that. And they were married for 20 years. Then you get your Anne Boleyn story and all that kind of stuff. But this is the only thing that can create monogamy in that. So TradCons are very far off until they accept this aspect of it. Like, I feel like asking them every single time when they come to young men and they put this inordinate pressure on them, I want to ask them, how much money have you saved for your daughter's marriage? Have you even thought about that? So how's your daughter, if you want your daughter to be the stay-at-home submissive wife, why are we only doing traditionalism halfway? Do traditionalism all the way.
Right.
But what they'll do is they'll stay with the gaslighting and gynocentrism of the love match, of the love marriage. None of that is, particularly religious in a way. It's kind of a newer thing in history. That's not what dowries were happening all throughout Europe with United Christendom. It's happening before that.
Yeah, it's not like Matt Walsh did it the traditional way either. Like, he met his wife on Match.com. Oh. They talk about this. They talk about this story, and I'm like, you can see that. You
would think he's a lumberjack and that he was chopping trees down, and he met her, and she brought him sourdough, and they got married, and it was great.
Nothing against him, but it's just, like, as you were saying, it's cosplay. It's playing pretend. You can't be in a traditional marriage in this society. You can't.
Yeah, and
it's traditional as long as she wants it to be.
Yeah, it's cosplaying.
Yeah, she listens as long as she feels like it. There's no enforcement.
Yeah, that's why the trad wife thing is so funny too. Like, like the TikTok trad wife.
Yeah.
It's funny to me because I see that and it's like I'm watching them wear clown makeup. It literally might as well be clown makeup. It's like making fun of something. It just doesn't even exist. It's so ridiculous that it's been reduced to sourdough bread and dressing up in a certain way. There's no substance behind it. There is no dowry talk. There is no how much I saved up for my daughter's wedding to give them the best start.
I've made bread before, not sourdough, but I know how to make bread.
Yeah.
All I thought when I made it was, this is the biggest waste of time. I could have just bought it. It's like $5.
You know what I did?
And I tasted it. I'm like, it's really not. Maybe I'm just not that good at it. But I'm like, it is not that different enough. You can go to Panera. It's like way better.
There's that, and it's like, if you actually cook for yourself, I feel like if men aren't marrying till they're 30, they're doing something. They're cleaning up after themselves. They're cooking their food. I challenged myself to bake a cake from scratch. And after I did it, I was like, it's not that hard.
It's not that hard.
What the heck's everybody complaining about? This isn't that bad. Roasting a chicken's not that bad.
That's like the general consensus I get from men. I've heard, like, whenever women say something super hard, I always just think it's not that hard.
Yeah.
And what I'm not a parent, so I can't say this until I've done it. But I heard that a lot of my male friends that have children, that's their response about being a dad.
Yeah.
Is that they thought it was going to be so difficult and that they thought it was really easy.
Yeah.
And they heard so much for years how being a mother is the hardest job, and they're like, this is it. Yeah,
it's not that bad. Or, I mean, it's interesting because there's certain things they'll say to keep the gaslight going. And it's like, what about all this unpaid labor we've been doing?
Oh my God, the emotional labor.
Yeah, and it's like men have to do so much emotional labor because if she's in a bad mood, or think about you can walk in the house and you got to be careful, not set her off. Or they'll say all this home activity. Then it's like, what about men? Men got to clean the gutters, change the oil, change the alternator, fix the leak in the sink. there's a ton of stuff you can name off that men do that's unpaid.
You guys don't talk about your problems. So if we're going to talk about emotional labor, like, women talk about our problems, men don't.
Yeah, and then you got to sit there and do emotional labor and listen to it and say, oh my God, I'm sorry that happened. And, wow,
I saw this clip of Fresh where like he was doing the voice that when he pretends to listen to women, and it was so funny. He's like, really?
Yeah, oh my God.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, if anything, it's the men doing emotional labor. Because if we gave you guys the silent treatment, you would it's probably kind of nice.
Well, it's funny. Sometimes women will call and it's like they will be digging to find the chink in the armor. Like I had someone call me once and she was like, she would always have things to complain about. And she was like, how come every time I call you, like you're just on a walk or you're drinking a cup of tea or you're reading a book? And I was like, in my mind, I'm thinking, because I would never tell you my problems. But I was like, because everything's good. Everything is fine.
Because you guys have inner peace.
It's just, so there's a lot of interesting things out there that keep the gaslight going. And I don't know, reading about the dowry or looking at child support, I feel like helps me just kind of tug at the curtains here at the end and see what's outside of this. And
so you said like romantic love, or I can't remember the word, a love match? And you said that wasn't really historically a thing.
No. So Peter Wright, he does this is really a specialty.
Great,
yeah, and he has gynocentrism.com, but he charts basically chivalry becoming romantic chivalry. And, back then chivalry was a knight's code, and a knight would go into a lord's service and do all these militaristic things, and he would be awarded different lands, which would give him different incomes, and there was a reason to do this. Then as romantic chivalry starts to come and you get tales of knights going into what was called love service for different ladies, and they would go, do these different tasks or, all for their lady. And this kind of starts off with the very small elite class for a long time. And then you start to see things like the printing press come in. You start to see tales of this stuff being read all over Europe, all over the New World. Then you get into modernization and industrialization and these different income opportunities. And you start to get the democratization of love. So you start to move away from what was a marriage of reason into what is a marriage of folly, where we're letting emotions dictate who we're going to marry for the rest of our lives, at least back then when they had more normal divorce laws. And as you can see, it's been a disaster. And
I thought
here we are.
Pretty well.
I mean, on TV, maybe. Maybe, that's another thing too, right? Because when TradCon sell family, they're selling what was on TV in the 50s.
Right.
And it's like, that was the new modern American family. This is what the TV was probably new back then, where everybody could afford one, and it was selling us an idea about a family. Families were a lot more integrated throughout generations. And even before the church, there were more clan type families, which are very different. Then the church comes in, the church institutes monogamy, makes all these changes, consanguinity, so cousin marriage goes away. That's a whole different history there. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting facets about how that works or how that used to work. But as the church came in, it made Europe this unique place because marriages couldn't happen unless they were within a certain degrees of people. And it starts to change things. And then we end up to where we are today once feminism and love matches come in and become popular, modernization and all these things. And now we're trying to figure out what the hell do we do? It's all crashing down.
And you said there was more incentive to marry, not now, but earlier. I think you said there's more incentive for people to marry within their
within class.
Culture. That's what you said.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, listen, I mean, like the case of Cyprus or whatever culture you're from, this is just, I've never read this anywhere, this is just my opinion, but if you're from somewhere, I kind of look at these things as checkpoints of culture, right? Like there's you growing up here, then there's the wedding. A wedding is this incredibly cultural thing, then there's the way you do funerals and all this kind of stuff. If you're a man growing up in a culture and you're looking at your options on the table for marriage, if you're going to do a love match, which could be anybody, not in your culture, whatever, you're attracted to each other, you're not going to get these financial incentives. But your culture may offer you something to take the arranged marriage deal or take marrying within the in-group, endogamy, as they would say. And it's if you marry someone from your own, so to speak, this is what comes with it. In Cyprus, you're getting a house, a fully furnished house from the parents. In Italy, it would be the bride's father's job to build a house for the new couple.
Because it's kind of close by.
Yeah, so, obviously there wasn't dating apps and stuff, but I would imagine that there was still an incentive to say, hey, marry within your culture because this is all the things that come with it. Now culture is mostly just the kind of dressing that people wear. It's the food or, that, pattern looks nice or whatever it is. Or we're all cosplaying, so to speak, but the substantive stuff isn't there.
So where would you recommend men go to find these high-earning women? Like what? Because you saw a lot of salaries, right? So
I know everybody hates this, but I swear to God, I would do a nurse, a pharmacist. I know they'll say a nurse will cheat on you, but you're not protected from that anyway.
Yeah.
All right. A pharmacist.
The PI we had on said the housewives were more likely to cheat.
Well, that's even crazier. I always hear nurses are the ones.
No, well, he didn't say. He said who's more likely to cheat, a housewife or a career woman, and he said a housewife.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, God, that's sad.
Yeah. Think about it. They got more time.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're cheating at the hospitals or what, but there's only so many doctors, right?
I always say that because I always saw so many nurses paying alimony. Okay. And let me tell you, a woman that has to pay alimony is pissed. She was the hardest woman to make a phone call to. They want to bite my head off. They're like, how do I have to pay child support for my own children or this or that, or he does nothing or he's lazy. And it's like, somehow it's different when they have to pay.
Right.
But men have been doing it for so long. Nobody cares about that. So
you saw a lot of nurses that were on alimony.
Yeah.
What's the most common one?
Where I'm at, there's a lot of nurses. You'd sometimes see, very rarely a doctor woman or this or that. I do think it is, as we go now into the future, that was a trend in child support we were seeing, was that we're starting to see an uptick in women paying child support.
Right.
It's still mostly men, but it's definitely gone up, and this is because of careers and all this kind of stuff. So, the chances of you swinging like a pharmacist while you got a cushy remote job where you make some small amount of money, probably not high, but at least look for something where it's some kind of contribution. If it's not her working, her parents better be giving her something. Grandpa better come in and say, here's $250,000 for the down payment on the house. It's in both of your names. Something like that. But that's what I noticed. And I told you about my friend that, he's getting married. He just had a son, and she's a nurse. She makes more than him, and I'm just like, if it ever goes south, I know exactly what you got to do. You're in a good situation. I've just read, just to say it again, I've read too many divorce judgments, too many child support orders, where it's men. We always make fun of women for giving away the milk and, why buy the cow? But men do that with marriage a lot, even with child support. We give it away without getting anything in return. So I think that the number one thing to focus on is negotiating, not being afraid to pay attention to that kind of stuff. And I think the way it's going, it's either going to be people avoiding marriage, or it's almost like saying, okay, look, we're MGTOW, we're on a marriage strike, but this is the deal I'm willing to take.
Right.
And I would love to see that kind of mindset become pervasive. Now, and I'll be honest, technology is an X factor. We have IVF. We got AI coming, dating apps. We're in a new world we've never seen before. I just think that understanding some past wisdom can help us make better informed decisions, especially families with money and wealth. Too many times you see somebody start to gain wealth and money and they don't know how to parlay that, basically. And that's how they get screwed. And, the NFL guy gets with an OnlyFans person. Right. That's new money. I have a suspicion that old money are still practicing some form of dowry, just very silently, or almost even...
I've heard men say that they won't date women with nothing to lose.
Yeah.
And I've heard I knew a guy that was a pretty high earner, and that's what he told me. He does not mess with women with nothing to lose.
Yeah, you can't. At best, for a short-term engagement, at worst, okay, you're not married, you get screwed, you pay the child support, it sucks, but at least you're not also paying alimony and losing half your retirement and losing your property. And
Are you encouraging men to put women? We have a contributor to the channel. You might have heard him, Doug MPA.
Oh, he's the private investigator?
No,
that's
sorry. That's someone else.
Oh, that's Russ.
Yeah.
Okay, I like Russ.
No, yeah, he's good too.
Yeah.
I feel responsible for him because
yeah.
I was the one who was telling him. I saw a post of his on Twitter and I was like telling him to post.
Okay.
I was like, these are
I
great,
watch all of his stuff.
These are great stories. So I was the one who was telling him before anyone even knew him.
Yeah.
Get on.
I think that's how I found him, was from you posting them.
Yeah, because I just thought the stories are good. But sorry, Doug MPA is a contributor, and he like calls into the show a lot, or he like works with us, and he says that men should put more women on alimony and child support.
Yeah,
to see it.
On my stream, I was reading an article about it, and it was about these high-powered women in DC, and a lot of them experiencing alimony. And just their experiences with that and how angry they were and all that kind of stuff. But there is an uptick in that. It's going. I think marriage is just essentially a very different negotiation than seducing a woman and getting laid or whatever. It's something that's completely different. And if you're going to sit here and say, oh, it's all about love and two people just got to love each other, I'm sorry, it's not going to work. It hasn't worked. It's proven itself to be a disaster. I'm not saying there's no room for love, but love can't be front and center. There has to be these other obligations. And, you have to look at it and say, man, I mean, I'm looking at you and she's got debt or whatever, or you don't got that good of a job or something. How's this supposed to work? What are you going, how's it? You got to put the pressure back on him a little bit. And she wants to be a stay-at-home wife. Okay, well, get your father on the phone. Get your grandpa on the phone. Let me talk to grandma.
Marriage is also delayed too, so you have a decade to save, but we spend.
Oh my God, that's such a good point. And I've thought about this because it's like, okay, from 18 to 28 or 30, you've been doing something. You're telling me you want to get married now and you haven't even saved 60 grand on the side? Like, what have you been doing this whole time? So then I'm supposed to have, $100K sitting here so we can put it in the house or whatever. What have you been doing?
Right.
And if they don't have a good answer for that, it's just, you're not ready for marriage. I'm sorry. You need to go back and figure this out.
Yeah. No, it's crazy because I did a show on like the average amount of debt women have.
Yeah.
And I wish I could remember off the top of my head, but I think if she got a master's degree, it's like 100 or 80.
Oh, yeah.
Something like that, yeah.
Well, one more thing, too. And then what they'll say is women will say that, oh, well, men just aren't good enough anymore out here. We can't find suitable men. But it's like, no, you're not supposed to be mad at the men that's not even related to you. Be mad at the people in your family for not giving you a dowry. Say, why didn't you save up for my marriage?
Yeah.
They might say, I did. You blew it all at college. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's not some stranger guy's fault that you're having trouble with marriage. It's whatever you guys are doing here in this project we call family. So figure it out.
College used to be for women to meet. Like, they used to say it was to get your MRS degree. So
Mrs.
So women would go to
yeah, they'd
school,
go meet. Yeah.
And that would kind of be a class there. But now, I mean, they just give loans out to everybody. So, like if you met your husband at Harvard, before they subsidized education, if you met your husband at Harvard, you're probably at the same class or the community college.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
But now they subsidized education, so anyone can get a loan that they can't afford.
That's part of it too, just from moving from traditional dowry stuff. It's just once people start going to college, they're away from their parents, and they start meeting each other that way. And then it's like, let's not move back in home. Let's get an apartment. Rent was $500 a month back then. Good times. We can live out basically love really needs to be financed, and people just can't finance love anymore. So.
That's a good title for this. Love should be financed.
Yeah.
And now the dads are going to pay for it, poor fathers.
Yeah, poor dads. I mean, it's like you got this guy, he's divorced, he's living on the other side of the railroad tracks now with nothing, and the daughters have been brainwashed that he's this bad guy, and then they're going to go and say, Dad, give me some money.
So what do you foresee for the future? Like, what do you think is going to happen in the next, we come back in 10 years, where are we going to be at?
Oh, that's a good question. At first I was looking at, I don't think the current president or any, presidency is going to make any significant legal changes in that regard. Birth rate will probably keep going down. I do like to be positive and think that they are viewing men as more of a unified voting bloc. So, you've seen articles coming out now to where, people on the left, the Democrats are trying, how do we appeal to men? How do they get them back over here? I'm hoping that, listen, if Democrats want to put out a platform that offers men something, they might be more likely to take it if TradCons are giving them nothing. I think we'll see a kind of catering, not maybe a catering, but a kind of appeal to men. That's what I'd love to see in 10 years. But to be honest, it does still look like kind of a disaster.
Yeah.
So I think you got to be very smart how you're negotiating things out here and where you're putting stuff down.
That's what I like about this content is even though we can't really help what happens to society, and I'm just not one of those YouTubers that's going to sell hope.
Yeah, I know.
I can't do it.
Same here.
I gotta predict where I see this going.
Yeah.
But it's great because the stuff you offer to men, you can at least give them a plan.
Yeah.
And they can you can save for if that ever happens.
Yeah. That's what I'd like to think. I mean, the child support's one thing. The dowry stuff is kind of I just kind of ended up. I know it sounds like it's kind of out of left field. It really is. It was for me, but I feel like that is important to help men kind of cast off the gaslighting that we have of this whole 100% protect and provide all of the time, pedestalization, and they make sourdough bread at home. We need to understand what was actually happening. So I look at that, I feel like I'm lucky to have remembered to look into this stuff. It was almost by accident.
Right.
So, I hope offering that to the space can do something to men's sort of collective memory and consciousness. And ultimately, I don't ever think we're going back. I think whoever says we're going back and all you got to do is just get married and do that is a pipe dream they're selling. They're delusional. I think we live in a world where we have new technologies like never before, birth control, dating apps, the internet, transportation like it's nobody's business. So we have to contend with those things. I think ultimately some people will figure it out. I think for guys, it's incredibly challenging. For me, I think it's okay to be realistic and come to terms with I may or may not ever have a family and do good where you can. And if you find a deal that's worth taking, maybe take the deal. So that's,
Do you think that men should fight for their kids in court? Because I've interviewed so many men, and it's interesting because a lot of them spent a ton of money fighting for their children and it just went to waste. They didn't get them anyways.
Yeah.
I found a decent amount of guys that represented themselves in one. I don't know, I randomly sat by a guy on a plane who told me his divorce story, and he said his lawyer was arguing so bad he fired him on the spot and just
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, and so I'm just curious from your point of view, would you recommend men represent themselves?
Yeah.
Would you recommend they hire a lawyer?
It's so funny that you asked that. I mean, let me tell you, working in child support, I've met a lot of bad attorneys. A lot of attorneys are so bad at their jobs, they just want to do cookie cutter stuff. I'll look at a case and know what's going to happen, and the attorney's just kind of stringing them on. I do think there's good attorneys out there, depending on this. I've seen, I used to call them Happy Meal divorces versus the Ferrari of divorces. Most 90% of people are going to get this sort of Happy Meal cookie cutter divorce, and that's just what it's going to be, and you're going to get run over from the bulldozer, and it's going to suck. I would say now fighting on your own for custody is worth doing because it'll be a heck of a lot cheaper. And from some of the folks I've spoke to and coworkers too, that I've seen a lot of this stuff or went through their own custody stuff, they say, you can do it on your own. It's worth trying. Father X is a guy I like to follow on Twitter. He has a YouTube channel, and he documented his whole custody battle, and he gives all these strategies for men. And he talks about how the attorney was basically not that great either.
Yeah.
There's a lot of mistakes I think men do. Men don't speak up when they're in court. You should go in there and ask. I had a lot of guys that come out even from child support course, and they're like, what about this? What about that? And I'm like, you were just in the court. And then I'm waiting for him after to tell him what's going to happen. You should have said that to him, but I don't think men should. If you're in a really crappy situation, it's kind of a Pyrrhic victory. And I understand the wash your hands of them and then let them come back to you later. I think that's easier said than done. I mean, it's probably pretty tough. That's the thing that sucks. There's this, to be realistic, there's this emotional thing. So I know a lot of men are going to want to fight for their kids. Personally, if it was me, I would go in there and try to fight with them without an attorney. That's just me from what I saw. Not that there's bad attorneys. I've seen some attorneys pull magic.
At least you're not wasting money.
Yeah, exactly. That's where it really comes from. Because if you're already paying child support, God forbid you're paying alimony too because you got married, and you're paying for the bills. You're responsible for so many other things. You're not going to have any money to hire the attorney anyways, and then it's harder to fight for custody because you can't afford your own place. That's going to be you got to go to court and say, hey, look, I can have my kids over here and they can be in this place and it's going to be a good place for them. So, I think if you're in a situation where you're with somebody and you park one over here, you're not married, and it ends up going bad, fighting for custody, I think, is a good idea there to do that. Especially if they got they're working and you're working. I think that makes sense to do that. I think if you're in a marriage and you got false abuse claim on you and you're getting screwed, it's probably going to not be worth it anyways because you probably won't be able to afford it. Maybe just, you know what I mean? Yeah. But again, easier said than done. I know every dad out there is probably going to wake up in the middle of the night thinking, where's my kid at? You know what I mean? So I would like to think, but it's easy for me to say as not having gone through it. This is just from what I've seen.
I mean, that's what I'm asking your point of view.
Yeah, that's just from my point of view as having read custody orders and things. I saw a custody order that was so stupid. The judge literally said that the husband had, basically the mom had full control over the kid's haircut. That one really annoyed me. I was like, first of all, what kind of haircuts is dad giving to where this has had to be filed at the Superior Court? And how stupid is this? You're a dad and I can't even figure out what haircut he's going to get? You can't trust me with that?
You're just spiteful.
Yeah.
I bet the dad...
Haircuts should be decided by mom.
You know what? I bet the dad had a haircut he really liked for the kid or wanted.
And it made him happy.
Yeah. That's what I bet.
And she had to take it away. It was like, one of those newer, nice haircuts.
I doubt she really cared. It was just she wanted to take something away.
Yeah, exactly. Unless the kid was coming home with clown hair or something, I don't know what he could have been doing. But you see stupid stuff like that in there. So,
well, thanks so much for coming on.
No worries. It was a pleasure.
This is great. I learned so much.
Yeah.
Also, he gave a 30-minute video behind the paywall where you actually gave them the tips and tricks on how to best protect yourself if you do choose to have kids.
Yep. So check it out. I went pretty deep into a lot of stuff. Maybe some stuff I should have thought twice about saying.
Yeah.
But
well, thanks so much for coming on.
No worries.
We'll put the link to your channel in the description. But do you want to shout it out anyway?
Yeah, sure. This is Shah. S-H-A-H. This is Shah.
Thanks so much for coming on. Make sure you go subscribe, guys. He is the newest, skyrocketing channel in this space. So
I appreciate that.
Thanks for watching, guys. Like the video. Please subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.